Zimbabwe have accepted us. Mweya wechene wapfumidza denga ratenda pasi patenda zvasungana kuti taakunopinda mukenani munyika yeuchi nemukaka.
Pasi nemandu.
Good evening, dear friends, colleagues, partners, and alumni of the Frederick Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Allow me to extend also a special welcome to the Deputy Head of Mission of the German Embassy, Mr. Michael Ott, and to the UNDP Resident Representative, Mr. Ayodele Odusola. Extended welcome and appreciation also to Dr. Innocent Watsani-Ncube, the lead researcher of the study we are launching today, who is joining us virtually, and our panelists for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let me recognize Dr. Chimani Kire here, who is part of the panel, Dr. ED Zanu, Dr. Chipaike, and also Koni Juarara. So thank you very much. These are our experts. They will actually help us today to actually interrogate all the issues that we have here around China's investments here in Zimbabwe and in Africa at large. On behalf of the Frederick Naumann Foundation for Freedom, I welcome you all to our 2023 Alumni Networking Evening and launch of our study on China's investments in parliaments, especially its investments here in sub-Saharan Africa. We are honored by your presence with us this evening. We hope you will have an opportunity to network, to also engage, reflect on all the contemporary issues affecting our world, including the investments we yearn for as a country, be they from the East, the West, the North, or the South. Why China? Many of you may ask. Why interrogate its investments in Zimbabwe and in Africa in general? If I may remind you that China is the world's second, if not the largest economy. And when it comes to building big things in Africa, China is unrivaled. There are more than 10,000 Chinese companies operating in Africa. This was as at 2021. And Chinese firms have a reputation for building swiftly. They can deliver a huge project within a single election cycle, thereby handing incumbent leaders a ribbon photo opportunity before their people vote. Their average, when they are really building huge infrastructure projects, is 2 years, 8 months, and this is attractive to many governments. More than 90% of countries in Africa receive Chinese investments. The Chinese are everywhere, and many of you would agree with me. They mean business, and they are every bit as involved across the continent as the Europeans and Americans. Hence, they deserve our special focus tonight. What is even more striking are China's infrastructural investments, more specifically, as I've said, the parliaments. China has introduced a new model of investment Whether this is good or bad, I'll leave it for the experts to say. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I call upon you. Let's interrogate these investments with a view to understanding and learning more, and when necessary, proffer recommendations on possible mutually beneficial models of investments. In his book, Prisoners of Geography, author Tim Marshall states, and I quote, "Africa has been equally cursed and blessed by its resources. Blessed insofar as it has natural riches in abundance, but cursed because outsiders have long plundered them. With this history, which is also unfortunately our present, we need to continuously examine these investments so that our interests as the peoples of Africa are protected. Keeping this at the back of our minds, may I humbly remind you of the obvious. Zimbabwe is sitting on the largest lithium reserves in the whole of Africa, and lithium is slowly growing to be the gem of our modern day. Whilst we celebrate this, and we know the whole world needs a piece of our lithium, we need to remain vigilant of the extents big nations will go to just to gain dominion of our resources. I believe we all yearn for mutually beneficial investments. Investments that will benefit the ordinary Zimbabweans. Investments that empower us as a people and as a nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a novice on this subject, so take whatever I've said at your own risk. There are experts tonight who are better suited to ignite your thinking with some credible views. I will therefore make way for those with the knowledge to take the stage. Let me end by thanking you once more for making this very exciting evening possible. Special thanks to the FNF team, Barbara, our project director, who is joining us virtually, Leanne, Cleo, Howard, and Rosa for all the hard work. Dear friends, help me appreciate them by giving them an applause.
And thank you, FNF, for inviting me to this particular occasion. And I want to start on the protocol you have established. Your Excellency, it's a pleasure to see you here. Germany is one of the countries that I've worked with for quite a long time. And Dr. Hube, who is going to present the outcome of the research, and also our panelists, our invited guests, distinguished participants. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. And thank you for the opportunity for me to make some kind of comment on Chinese investment in Africa. But I will say, instead of UN perspective, it is with some reflections. Because what I'm going to tell you, I'm not telling you the UN perspective, I'm telling you my view about this. And I'm saying it unequivocally because I happen to be one of the people that wrote the concept note of FOCAC that started a while ago. For about 2 or 3 years, we served as the secretariat, which I managed. And it's really a pleasure for me to provide some kind of reflections on issues like this. But the reflection I'm going to provide will be using the development lens. I'm not going to use the political lens, as has been possibly might be the expectation. So my intervention will be in about 4 different parts. The first one is to provide the context of the context of Chinese investment in Africa, and also look at what has been done so far. What does Africa need to get the best out of this partnership, and provide some kind of conclusions. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if I start with the context, one of the things that I always asked myself is, why are so many partners interested in Africa? And I'm sure you know it better than I do. But I just want to summarize it in about 3 to 4 key areas. One is the soft power. The soft power comes in different forms. It can be in form of trade, It can be in form of forming alliances for bigger things later. The second one is about diplomatic alliances. This is something that is really very important, particularly in the area of multilateralism, where the views of other countries are needed. The third one is about economic benefit. And I want to labor, because one of the reasons why Africa has been the center focus of all partners, whether it's from the West or from the East, not from the North or from the South. If you look at it, what has been the blessings of Africa is more or less a curse. Because if you look at the global deposit of platinum and cobalt, about 90% of it globally is residing in Africa. And if you don't have those things, there are no cars, there are no television, there are no, your phone will not be working without them. 75% of coltan also is part of it, 67% of manganese, 50% of gold, and also about 35% of uranium. Without that, the plane cannot fly. So there are a number of things which, again, makes it to be very attractive to many partners. The last component of it is what I call geospatial location of Africa. If you look at it, west, east, north, south, Africa is centrally located. And it becomes a geospatial advantage to many partners that are very close to the continent. And also, all partners, irrespective of what form they are and where it comes from, and their partnership have their own strengths and weaknesses. Whether it's FOCAC, whether it's AGOA, whether it's EU-Africa partnership, whether it's TICAD, all of them have their strengths and weaknesses. And what we need to do is, how do we leverage this? How do we maximize the benefits of this partnership and minimize the weaknesses? That is one role Africa has not been playing very well. And I just want to also underscore the fact that most partners may use different approaches, but the overarching goal remains the same. It's either they're looking for soft power, it's either they're looking for diplomatic influence or economic benefit. It could be one or a combination of all this. So that's why we need to really take strategic effort to maximize this for the continent. Now, there are a number of things that we need to take into consideration, but I personally always look at what I call competition for Africa, not really as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Because it's a blessing in disguise. It's really showing us that there are some lessons we need to learn on the basis of the partnership we've developed since independence. And in this regard, we need to rethink about natural resource management policies and strategies. We need to re-strategize on the economic potentials in terms of benefit from any part of partnership we have. And also, we need to really rethink, how do we use the partnership to leverage the demographic advantage that Africa has that many other regions of the world do not have. So this is one thing which I think we need to really reflect upon, particularly the need for us to develop a win-win partnership strategy. This we don't have. And I strongly believe this is one of the realities we need to face. And one of the other things which I just want to underscore is that China path to relevance. China becoming a global player. China becoming a major trading partner to Africa is a reality that both the global south and the global north need to learn from. It's the reality of today. Particularly, the need for all partners to align their needs with the interests and the urgent needs of their partner. So the era of saying, no, it is my wish, it is my need that drives the partnership, and that era of master-beneficiary relationship is gone, and it's gone for good. That's the major lesson for the partnership with China. Now, if you look at Chinese investment, I'll look at it from different dimensions. Investment as well as credit facilities. I know you are focusing more on investment. If you look at the loans that have been granted between 2000 and 2022 to African countries by China, it's quite huge. And 49 out of 55 countries, if you add Sahrawi Republic as part of the countries, have benefited what we call 170.1 billion over this period. And this represents 64% of the total loan given by the World Bank, and 5 times the loan given by African Development Bank to Africans. So, by that magnitude, it's a power to reckon with. Now, if you look at it, there are so many dimensions in terms of the various areas of interest. But I just want to also underscore one of the elements you have raised in terms of investment. If you look at foreign direct investment over the period, for instance, it started with a small amount of about 75 million in 2003. By 2021, it was 5 billion in terms of foreign direct investment. Now, if you look at the kind of investment that was made just a few days ago, I mean, decisions that were made at the CEO conference of the 3rd Belt and Road Initiative Conference. All the CEOs agreed to invest 97 billion, though globally, not in Africa alone. So you can see that it's really huge. So this is one of the things which we think is really very important. And if you look at the various areas, it's huge. Whether in the area of power, that is energy generation and distribution, whether in the area of transport, whether in the area of communication, trade, and a host of other things. But there are a lot of benefits attached to this. One of it is no imposition of governance model on African countries where they relate with, heavy investment, no intervention in domestic affairs, and also reduced dependence on traditional partners. But essentially, there are a lot of criticisms, a lot which we need to take into consideration. Debt trapping, meaning trapping many countries because of debt overhang. Economic dependence, we're solving one problem, we're creating another dependence. And also prioritization of the country interest without putting into consideration the interests of the national they're partnering with. And also lack of transparency and accountability in most of the loans given. These are issues that have been raised. But I think we need to really, what can we do to maximize the benefit of any partnership, be it China, be it with Europe, be it with other that we have been relating with. The first one is transparent and accountable deals. That should not be under the table deals. Everything must be on the table for people to see so that we can monitor an account. Also, we need to leverage the issue relating to moving up on the global value chain. Industrialization matters for Africa. Any partnership that is unable to drive that, we need to watch out. Any partnership that is unable to leverage the critical mineral resources we have for energy transition, it's what we have to watch out for. I see no reasons why African countries, particularly in SADC, cannot leverage these for what they call energy transition in terms of electric vehicles and a number of other things. So these are things which we consider to be very, very important. But in conclusion, because I know the moderator is really worried about time. I want to really conclude by going into one of the adages that says, when you give roses to others, the fragrance lingers on your hand for a while. Meaning, if you do good, it will come back to you. But if you do something bad, it will equally come back to you. Partnership should be seen within that framework. And on this note, I want to really call on various partners that Africans must be a friend to all and not an enemy to none. So in that regard, avoid what they call ideological confrontation. Avoid geospatial rivalry. What you need to think about is, how is this partnership going to benefit my people? How is it going to lead to long-term development of my country? And I think that's one thing we need to. And also, we need to really examine those criticisms that have been levied against the partnership, Africa-China partnership. We need to look at the realities. Some of them are unfounded, but some of them are genuine. So we look at them and see how we use it to maximize the benefits of partnership and minimize the cost to our respective countries. So thank you for this opportunity for me to really provide my kind of reflections on Chinese investment in Africa. I wish you a very good wishes.
Excellent. I wish I was home. I see people are enjoying themselves sitting on garden chairs. Your Excellency, Mr. Michael Ott, Councillor and Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the Republic of Germany. Your Excellency, Dr. Ayodele Odusola, UNDP Resident Rep in Zimbabwe. The FNF leadership, fellow panelists, of course, a special shout out to my teacher, Dr. Chimanikire, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, and for good measure, comrades and friends. I'm going to talk a bit about the study. I think some of you might have received it already. How China is inverting democracy-enabling institutions in Africa. Actually, I'm not sure whether I can share my slides. Is it possible? Is it possible to share my slides?
Yes, it is possible.
Okay. Thank you. Let me then proceed on my talking points then. So I'll split my presentation, my 15-minute presentation into three. First, I'm going to talk about the context of the study. Then I'm going to talk about my findings, and then the recommendations. But first of all, of course, I'm grateful to FNF, for collaborating on this very important topic that I think that is going to be more important, given I think what Dr. Odusola was talking about, and also seeing the current events geopolitically. So what do we know? Already from the previous presentation, you saw that China's economic interest and political influence in Africa has increased. And just to give you a sense, so China, has managed to establish at state level diplomatic relations with all countries in Africa, save for Eswatini, which maintains relations with Taiwan, as it were. And then there are also over 10,000 Chinese firms in Africa, and this consists of state enterprises, private large companies, and small businesses. And as of 2019, there were about over 200,000 Chinese nationals. So the result here is that China, obviously is concerned about its long-term security of its investment. And it's very interesting how it has been responding to this. So this study was looking at some of the things that China has been doing or is doing to respond to the rise, rather the increased concerns about the long-term security of its investments, both political and economic. All right, I'm told that I can be able to share now. You can see my slide, right? I hope you can see them. So yeah, so this was like the introduction, Mnangagwa with the king at the new parliament building. We'll talk about that later on. So how is China responding to this? And so to hedge its bets, as it were, of late it has been investing time and resources into developing the domestic political institutions of African states, inclusive of political parties and the parliament. So this paper looks at China's investment in parliament and also in African political parties. So this is what the paper is about. And also it's important to mention that this is an exploratory research designed as a starting point and meant to ignite a conversation, because this is an area that, hitherto it has not been really explored. And the paper's recommendations indicate this line of approach. So again, still on the context, I need to say something about the word inverting, because the study, the title says how China is inverting democracy enabling institutions in Southern Africa. So it might sound like, so invert is invert, it's not subvert, because these are two different things. My starting point is that if you look at parliament and political parties, they actually represent two sides of the democratic governance value chain. So at the basic level, political parties supply the civilians or the volunteers who then are converted into public representatives through elections. And then parliaments become vested with this institutional power to make laws and scrutinize the actions of those carrying out executive tasks in government. And by and large, in most countries, in most countries in Southern Africa, parliamentarians also constitute members of the executive, as they become ministers. So which means that when you target political parties who are the vehicle, invariably, of taking people into public office, you are targeting the heart, of the political system, as it were. So all the other things, I think Dr. Bisola was talking about, how deals that are done are supposed to be, deals that are beneficial to Africa. This is consummated at the level of, the public representatives. And so this idea of China then inverting, which is making use of these institutions that invariably are supposed to be democracy enabling institutions if they were to operate, optimally. So that's what I mean by the term inverting. And so how then is China engaging in these institutions, in both parliament and in political parties? So there are two key findings that we made when we were doing the study. So the first one is that there is a concerted plan to develop long-term relations with dominant ruling parties in Southern Africa. And so this is done through the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. Remember, we spoke about, the different actors involved, the state, the companies, the party. So in this case, the party is at the forefront of developing relations with dominant ruling parties. And just to give you some few examples, in July 2022, which is last year, the 6 liberation movements, governing parties in Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, and Tanzania, inaugurated a party leadership training center in Tanzania, which was financed by the Chinese Communist Party. And so this is a place to strengthen the capacities of party executives from this liberation movement. And then also, prior to that, there has always been a long-standing relationship between, bilateral relationship between the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and the constituent parties of the FLMSA. So the FLMSA is an association of liberation movements that are in government in 7 countries. So I mentioned 6. So Botswana joined in 2019. So they're now 7. So these parties actually, they meet annually in summits. They also organize, they meet during members' party conferences. And so when they meet, they plan about how to retain political power. And China, through the CCP, has been a linchpin in terms of providing technical and material support to the liberation movements, working jointly under the FLMSA banner, and also working individually within each of these countries. But there's a second bit to it, which is that China is actually first on the scene in contexts where political change, happens. So let me just take a minute to explain that. So you'll know that in Southern Africa there are countries such as Zambia and Malawi, where since 1994 in the case of Malawi and 1992 in the case of Zambia, there's been a political turnover, which is the change of party in government. And so you might think that when there's a change in party in government, also maybe there might be limited influence of external partners. So in the paper we speak about the example of Zambia. So you will note that when Michael Sata of the Patriotic Front was campaigning as an opposition political leader, he was campaigning on an anti-China platform, raising a lot of issues about, I think some of them, that we have seen in the media about the imbalance in the arrangements that are done between Chinese companies and the government of Zambia, labor issues in terms of that, Chinese they cut corners and they get away with it because there is limited regulation of Chinese companies operating in that context. But after that, when Michael Sata won the elections in 2011, the first person to congratulate him was the Chinese ambassador to Zambia. And then also he was then invited by President Hu Jintao for a state visit to China. And after that, his anti-China rhetoric was toned down. And also, you would also see that in 2021, when the current president of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, won, and actually before that, during the elections, it seemed that China, to most observers, China was actually backing the Patriotic Front and Edgar Lungu, and its leadership had actually gone to attend a meeting organized by the Chinese Communist Party then. And also it was important because the UPND, the current ruling party in Zambia, is a party that has been a long-standing a liberal outlook, and has been working with the Westminster Foundation for quite some time. But quickly again, the Chinese ambassador was the first on the scene. He was the first to congratulate Hakainde Hichilema, and soon after that, Batuke Imelda, the Secretary General of the UPND, was invited at an event of the Chinese Communist Party, and he had very nice words about the Chinese development path, and how they would want to emulate that. And of course, I think that, of course, most of you realize that when Zambia was doing its negotiations, debt relief negotiations recently, China was a linchpin in terms of facilitating that breakthrough, particularly towards the end. So that example and many others in the paper speaks about that the Chinese are able to cultivate long-standing relations with the dominant ruling parties, but also they are first on the scene in contexts where there is political change. And then the second and final, finding that I'm going to talk about today is the aspect of an intriguing interest in parliament. So it seems that China is especially interested in parliaments in Southern Africa. And they have expressed their interest by actually coming forward to donate parliament buildings. And I use donate, to express how this gift, how this is done. So China comes to a country in Southern Africa that actually needs a parliament building, that even have plans for a parliament building, that even have designs, prototype designs for a parliament building, and then steps forward and volunteers to construct a building. But in doing so, be it in the Seychelles, be it in Zimbabwe, be it in Malawi, and be it in Lesotho, countries that I have studied. So China decides to actually say, we're going to do this, but we're going to do this on our own terms. It sets aside the plans that are already there and does it their way. So it starts from design. Even if they are designs, it produces its own design, and then it brings its own construction firms. And this is coordinated from the Ministry of Commerce, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's a very important distinction. And once they are constructed, then there's a cycle of what are called maintenance agreements that are signed between the beneficiary state and the Chinese government, which provides long-term maintenance support. So it when one looks at the modus operandi, or the way in which these parliaments are provided to beneficiary countries, you get a sense that China is building itself into these parliamentary institutions so that it can be relevant, it can be needed, and it can be called upon in the long term. Because the alternative would be to just give money to support the plans that had already been there. So that in itself shows that the Chinese government is interested to occupy the space within these very important political institutions that, as I said, they, if they are working optimally, they could support, inclusive democratic institutions. So, as I conclude, I'll speak about the recommendations now. So in the paper, we speak about 3 recommendations. And remember, I spoke about, that this is an exploratory study that's meant to ignite a conversation about this issue, and also looking at this as a linchpin to understand, how, China safeguards its economic investments and also its influence in the long term. So the first one is that there is really a need to invest in research that deepens our understanding of the details of China's political influencing strategies, particularly targeting, these political institutions, parliaments, political parties, in order to develop a comprehensive communication and stakeholder engagement strategy. So apart from what I've noticed in doing, because I was doing ethnographic study, like talking to people who have worked with the Chinese, in this project, how this project came about. There is a lot of interesting material. Some of it coming in my forthcoming book. But the more we know about the detail, what ethnographers call thick description, we would be able to know exactly what is the game plan here. So it's a very important area to look at, and particularly the relationship between China and the liberation movements in Southern Africa, because I think you have seen that I think in the recent election in Zimbabwe, you saw that when the SADC observer mission gave a particular view about the election, within a day of announcement, you had the key SADC leaders, 2 out of 3 of members of the SADC Troika, actually congratulating Zanu PF instead of remonstrating with them based on what the SADC observer mission had said. So you can see that there is an important layer, a behind-the-scenes layer of liberation movements and also the capacity-building work that China is doing. Secondly, Germany, the European Union and other partners and civil society in Zimbabwe, they work in what is called a field called parliamentary strengthening, supporting parliament in various ways. And of course, even the United Nations, I think Ondusola would know this. So what I got a sense in the Zimbabwe case, so there's something in parliament called the Parliamentary Program Unit, which is coordinating with what are called international partners that I've just mentioned. But Chinese support to the Parliament of Zimbabwe doesn't go through the PPU. It goes through the clerk of parliament. So I think it is important we make a recommendation here that outright exclusion or the elimination of China's influence in parliament is no longer possible, especially in the short term. So it will be strategic to integrate China into mainstream parliamentary strengthening program planning in order to limit the negative effects of its unilateral support to parliament. So the current arrangement creates a parallel process, as I've mentioned, and such a move potentially impacts the bottom line, which is strengthening the democratic governance capabilities of parliamentary institutions. And I think it is in the sense of, as I said, China might be inverting parliament and political parties, but it has not yet demonstrated that it wants to subvert them. So, for instance, you can see that these parliamentary facilities, they strengthen rather than weaken the position of parliament within the institutional structure. So it's important to integrate them. Third and final, as I conclude, I think we need to have a conversation about how we develop resilient democratic institutions. So if you would want, if there is need to challenge what some might see as authoritarian leaning approach of China and the way in which when there's the kind of parties that they support, probably they are not parties that can drive inclusive democratic politics. There should be alternatives. But those alternatives should be alternatives that are strong, that are resilient, and also even beyond political parties, independent media, civil society, so that they can be a counterfoil to these ostensibly authoritarian political influencing activities. And so this should, and also what's also important is we should learn from how China has successfully managed to invert these political institutions, particularly how it has managed to get these dominant ruling parties and the kind of program, so that we learn from them and then we build resilient democratic institutions even from learning from them. So I will end here for now and reiterate my gratitude to the Frederick Newman Foundation for supporting this study. And probably I will take a few questions at the discretion of the moderator. Thank you very much.
Very interesting that we are looking at how China is using the soft power approach, and I think the UN representative, UNDP representative really spoke about it, because China knows how to come into the dance floor at the right time. And if you look at the history of China, even when we were developing the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, they've always clearly spoken about social and economic rights. So they come to the dance floor. If anyone remembers in COVID, when we were trying to negotiate vaccines, that China came in when everyone was needed. So for me, it always reminds me in African culture that you do not come into someone's house and start criticizing them. So China understands that, and they understand that the policies are important. So investing in parliament and giving the infrastructure is very important.
Thank you. I think if we had representatives from the Chinese embassy, it was going to be more advantageous to us, because one thing that they would have stressed is that they are actually enhancing democracy by building the parliament houses. And I think it's a good thing to have those parliament houses, especially stemming from the fact that African countries do not have that financial space to be able to be putting up those structures as a result of the infrastructure gap that is there. Annually, I think Africa needs about $100 billion to invest in infrastructure, which money they don't have. So if they have this space to be able to build these institutions, I think it actually enhances democracy. And as we have heard that Germany or other partners are actually partnering the Parliament of Zimbabwe, for example. So it means the Chinese also coming in, with these donations of parliaments. I think, it actually ensures that democracy is strengthened.
Okay, we'll move to Dr. Eve and end with the Honorable Dr. Eve, ma'am. Your take.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. What I would have loved to hear more is how do we as Africans move out of the dependency syndrome that we have, because it seems like we are in a catch-22 situation where every investor is coming and investing and going away with surpluses and profits which are supposed to benefit the African continent. So my take on the issue is basically that we as Africans should also use our own soft power, and we have noticed that President Cyril Ramaphosa and other Africans, they have begun even to use that soft power, particularly in the Ukrainian conflict where they were going to negotiate the grain deal. I think that is the start where we can use our own soft power and start to influence even nations that are outside of Africa. For instance, China is using its soft power to build Confucian institutions, centers for African studies. We can also use that leverage and also build our own institutions to understand their culture and their way of doing things. And when you look at China, China has its own democracy, which is quite different, what they call Chinese democracy with Chinese characteristics. So we as Africans can also have our own democracy, which we call African democracy with our own characteristics. I don't think that Africa doesn't have the resources to actually build the parliaments. We have the resources. We need to harness our domestic resources that we have. We have an abundance of minerals, as is highlighted in the paper that was published, and we can harness those minerals. We need to beneficiate our resources so that we can be able also to come out of dependency and not remain as repositories of raw materials. I would like to end by quoting Julius Nyerere. He said that we are the only continent
recording in progress
that buys at the price that is determined by the seller, and we sell at the price that is determined by the buyer. So we need to start determining the prices. We need also to start patenting even our raw materials. That's what the Western countries have done. That's what the East has done. They've patented their technology. But we can also patent our raw materials. What is stopping us from doing that? What is stopping us from leveraging on our raw materials and actually using them to actually benefit and build Africa? As long as we have the begging bowl, we will remain having the begging bowl and saying that we cannot finance our own infrastructure or development. When we can, we have an abundance of raw materials, and we need to use that to develop Africa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eve. She's harnessing on the importance of not relying on getting aid, but taking the initiative and using the resources that we have to also engage other countries. Moving on to Doctor, can you kindly take us in a minute or so your reaction to the study?
Hello, thank you very much. Well, congratulations to Innocent. As he said, he's a former student of mine. But having said that, I'm not going to approve his study. I'm just joking. Well, we know that the Chinese have been here for quite some time, very, very some time. In the early 60s, you had the Chinese distributing the Mao booklets, the thoughts and all those badges to many African countries, liberation movements and all that. After that, we see what my colleague here, Eve, has mentioned, the establishment of all these Confucian institutions in our universities. They are there. Now, since this study is about the invasion of, or inverting, according to Innocent, of African institutions, the question is, are the Chinese really naive to think that Africans can, take whatever ideology they can impose on them? I don't think so. Because all these institutions being built wherever in Tanzania, Africans go there, maybe for holiday. I don't think they are serious about whatever they take from these institutions. And the other thing maybe, since it is an ongoing study, is I didn't hear the presenter talking about the PAP, the Pan-African Parliament, because that should have been a central point where they could have gone to talk to different, parliamentarians and see what they are thinking about. So maybe it's a suggestion to go back to Joburg. I think that is where the PAP is, and see if they. But personally, I don't think if the Chinese really want to change African or the ideology, which by the way has not been defined by the study, I doubt it. They might as well dwell on this road and belt whatever the issue. Thank you.
So there's a research that I carried out, and we found out that a lot of people in communities, in the rural communities where we find a lot of these investments landing, are unaware of these investments. And that's why you see a lot of tussling and a lot of fighting and a lot of pushback by the human rights defenders on how they're receiving some of these investments. So which means, for me, I'll take the angle that some of our policymakers are not taking the necessary steps to educate people on what's happening. Because in this research for us, we were actually suggesting that, can we know the granular detail of how much has been put in by China and how much is going to that particular community and how many people in those communities are actually benefiting from this. And this is the role of the legislator, making sure that we are protected. We have all these beautiful laws that are on the ground, but then when it comes to the implementation part for them to actually follow, there is no follow through. And that's where, when the first speaker spoke about that these underhand dealings that happen. When you look at China investment particularly, you find it very difficult to track how much is going into gold mining, how much is actually going into lithium, how much, we know a ballpark, but how much exactly, and how much is it going to benefit the youth? We've got a lot of people here who are the youth, but how is that knowledge also going to stay within Zimbabwe? How much knowledge is actually staying in Africa? So our legislators need to pay more attention to that and make sure that as all of this is happening, as the brokering is happening, that the lower person is protected. And I would like to emphasize, because a lot of my work is also focused on how women experience these investment portfolios, the violence, just the sheer violence of what these investments bring in rural communities is appalling. So they need to look into that, so that when you're looking at the deal, when you're looking at the contract itself, what protections are there? Because usually we are very focused on the education of how maybe gold comes to the granular detail, but how does it reflect on the ground to the community? What are those basic things that we need? We need schools, we need education, we need resources on the ground that make us feel that we are actually being developed, not just being extracted. So that's what the policymaker, that's what the legal framework within our countries needs to emphasize on. So for me, that's my angling, that our policymakers and our legal, our parliamentarians are not questioning that enough, and they could do more.
Dr. Ronald, are ordinary Zimbabweans benefiting?
Yeah, that is a very important question, but let me start by looking at probably the negotiations that take place, regarding these particular arrangements. I've also done research regarding this area, and what has actually come out is that it is mainly the top politicians and bureaucrats who are involved in the negotiations to do with these investments and loan agreements. And sometimes even Parliament is not that involved. Sometimes the deals are signed at the executive level, then they are brought to Parliament for rubber stamping. So it means that there is no buy-in from the legislature. Not only that, but they should be created a situation where also civil society plays a role. A multi-actor kind of approach that ensures that there is transparency, because there is a lot of secrecy and opacity in these kinds of agreements, and this is the reason why the community, at the basic level, appears not to be getting the benefits. And the other issue is that community leaders are not empowered to negotiate. For example, when Chinese investors come into, rural communities. So sometimes it's very difficult for the leaders to negotiate with Chinese investors or those companies that are extracting minerals in those particular areas. They must be empowered to be able to ensure that they negotiate with them so that they embark on corporate social responsibility activities that develop the very same communities in which they are actually investing. At the moment, Zimbabwe doesn't yet still have a comprehensive corporate social responsibility policy. They said it's still being developed, but then that is creating a whole lot of problems for communities from which minerals are being extracted and so on. So I would actually vouch, for a scenario where, politicians do not think that they know everything. They need to bring on board civil society. If you bring on board civil society, it means information is going to cascade down, to the individual on the ground. And there is also transparency and openness in terms of, the agreements, that are hammered. So I think that is the way to go if we are going to see advantages accruing, to the person at the basic community level, on the ground.
Thank you. Let me just point out that unless or until we take seriously the issue of industrialization in Zimbabwe, there is really nothing that we can do. We have more than 40 minerals under the ground. There's nothing that we can do. The capacity is not there. We are not investing in science and technology. And therefore, this thing of begging will continue because we don't have the capacity to extract our minerals. And the only thing that we can do, even the knowledge to know what is worth, in our country. Then the issue, I think, sorry, the UNDP rep is not there. He said something about the win-win situation. The win-win situation can only take place when you have equal capacities. Because I don't want to blame our leaders. I don't think they have the capacity to sit down and negotiate economic and trade deals. They don't have that. And that also comes to Parliament. The quality of our MPs, how do you see them? Are these people who can actually read the Constitution, understand it, analyze the budget, and make proposals? I mean, these are serious. A Constitution or a budget is a developmental instrument, but how many people, they don't even know. They can't. I remember when I was at the University of Zimbabwe, we had a project on science and technology. So we went to Parliament and we were asking these people there. They said, no, we have nothing to do with what you are talking about. So you can imagine that sort of scenario. But it's not their fault. It's the situation that we are in, where meritocracy is not necessarily, taken into account seriously. So that even when you go for trading negotiations, you need people with the capacity to negotiate. Not to sit down. Gone are days when diplomats would just sit and exchange pleasantries and drink cocktail beers and all. But now it's serious business. So that independence can only come when we are serious about the science and technology and this industrialization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chimani Kire. And according to him, it's a cocktail of issues, and we cannot have a situation whereby we're able to leverage and be able to put up demands as long as we have a lot of in-house issues that need to be ironed out. Dr. Eve, what's your take on the beneficiation of local people?
As has been highlighted by my predecessors, basically Zimbabwe is not benefiting as much as Africa is not benefiting because of the unequal relations that exist in terms of trade relations between China and Zimbabwe and the rest of the continent, where we are basically at the periphery of trade relations, and we have China being at the core or at the center. China also manufactures finished goods and sells back to us at a higher price than the raw materials that we export to China. So we are not benefiting. Also, China is also destroying our local industries. Right now, if you go into the city center, you can see that it's now a big flea market. We no longer have industries. There we had David Whitehead. It's no longer there because of the textiles that are coming from China. In terms of mining as well, people are not benefiting, they are not involved, they are not consulted. When these mining deals are made, they are not at the negotiating table. They don't know what is being negotiated. Our cultural heritages are being destroyed as well because the people on the ground or the civil society is not involved in these negotiations. It's usually the elites and the bureaucrats, and usually the deals are mired in secrecy, so that no one knows what really is being negotiated. Even the current debt that Zimbabwe has of China, no one really knows what it is amounting to. There is no transparency and there's no accountability from the government, and parliament also just rubber stamps. So it's a myriad of issues that need to be resolved so that Zimbabwe can actually benefit from these Chinese investments, and also African countries can benefit from these investments. Unless we take charge as a people, unless we decide that enough is enough and we need to develop, I don't think we will be. It's a mindset issue. There's need for decoloniality of the mind, because when colonialism took place, it was physical, or what I can say maybe territorial domination that was happening. But now there is the aspect of coloniality, where colonialism is even being perpetuated even after political independence has been gained. So there's need to decolonialize the mind. If we don't decolonialize the mind, that means that we'll remain dependent, we'll remain begging, and we need also, as citizens, to also start questioning the government's role in development, because it is the citizens' rights. The moment that we don't question government, that means that government can just make policies which are not to the benefit of the people of Zimbabwe. We need to demand accountability as civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. And now that we are in a situation like this, we've established where we're coming from and where we are, probably I would want to understand how best can we maximize from these partnerships with China, from these Chinese investments? Because like what the research indicated is that the issue is already there, and there is no way that we're going to retrogress and go backwards. With the current situation that's here and what we're experiencing, how best can we maximize to make sure that we also get value through these investments and partnerships, probably starting with Dr. Eve?
I think that the best way that we can maximize is actually to engage in capacity building, so that Africans are capacitated on how to negotiate. Like Dr. Chimanikire was saying, that we don't have the capacity to negotiate trade deals. That is very important, so that we can negotiate win-win agreements that benefit Africa. The moment that we are not able to negotiate, that means that we'll get these trade deals that we are getting, where, for instance, we have deficits in terms of our balance of payments, and it's not benefiting Africa. So we also need to demand the transfer of technical expertise to African countries, because when the Chinese come to construct the industries, the buildings, they come with the Chinese, and they don't transfer that technical expertise to the Africans. So there's need to transfer technical expertise. We can actually negotiate it in our trade deals. There's need also to demand also transfer of technology, because as long as we are behind in terms of technological advancement, and because as long as we are also behind in terms of lacking in capital that also then affects Africa. Because what we need is capital, what we need is technology, what we need is the technical expertise for Africa to develop and benefit from these negotiations. Thank you.
Dr. Chimani Kire.
I think one critical issue which has been missing is the issue of what is in international trade called BOT, build, operate, and transfer. So when these deals are being signed or negotiated, that element is always missing. That is, you come as an investor, fine, whether it's vertical, horizontal, or whatever, but there must be that undertaking that you come, you build, operate, and then transfer. Meaning that when an investor is here, they should actually involve the locals so that they can take over. Because as it is, there's nothing of that sort going on. Nothing, absolutely nothing. You know, so that I think is one critical issue.
I would think that we need more openness in terms of the negotiations that take place regarding these particular deals that we are talking about. We need to involve a lot of players so that the benefits accrue to the generality of the people. I've said that there is a mentality, especially with the African side, that it is only politicians and top-level bureaucrats who are able to negotiate these particular arrangements. But as a result, we've seen that there's a lot of secrecy and opaqueness. You don't know the details of what has been agreed to, and that becomes very problematic. So there is need for more openness and also inclusion of more players in these particular arrangements and deals. I hope we have government officials here who are listening so that they can actually take some of these views on board. Then the other issue probably is that we also need to do a bit of introspection, especially the African side, because there is a tendency of criticizing the Chinese, that they are harming our environment, they are not actually following up on labor rights, for example. But the problem is not with the Chinese. The problem is with the African side. The problem is with our own governments who are not enforcing the available laws and regulations. Recently, there was a study by the Institute for Development Information, something like that, who are actually saying that there are companies out there, the Chinese companies, who are actually boasting that they're actually protected. Whether they violate environmental regulations, they are protected. So it means that the laws that are there are not being enforced. So it means that we need to have the capacity to enforce the laws. As long as we are still involved in corruption, when we are supposed to be implementing the laws. For example, an environmental officer can actually go to a Chinese company that is actually destroying the environment. They are given probably $200 or $300. Then that's it. So it means if we are not enforcing the laws that are there, it means we are continuously going to be on the losing end. So this aspect of continuously blaming the Chinese, to me, it doesn't actually bode well. We also need to do a lot of introspection in terms of what we are doing on our side to ensure that we leverage on what the Chinese are coming with. Thank you.
So for me, I probably want to end with trade with China, if handled well, can benefit Africa and can benefit Zimbabwe. But how? For instance, China is the biggest manufacturer. It's the #1, actually. So that means whatever they're taking is raw material and it's going somewhere. Who are their biggest off-takers? We need to be aware of that. So being aware of that also helps us plan differently. That can we stop taking our raw material out? So instead, if we say we're sending 10 billion worth of lithium, can we say half of that we need the industry in Zimbabwe? And with that, we are putting all the environmental measures in place, all the laws in place, and making sure that we are industrializing, as the professor had said. Because right now, if we continue shipping out raw materials, and I think the late president said that, we're not going to end anywhere. We'll continue begging and we'll continue being in these relationships, because we've been in these relationships. It's not just China. We've been in this relationship continuously where we are the bed of raw material. So if we want our cotton, instead of it going to China and recycled and mixed with the Uyghur cotton, can we have the machinery back in Zimbabwe? And we don't have small-scale materials coming back, apparel coming back to Zimbabwe, which we then buy very expensively, and yet our cotton is probably going for $2 or $1 or cents. So these are things we need to be very, like in the design of our contracts, we need to say half of the raw material will go, but you're bringing us heavy machinery so that we can equally develop. Because there is an opportunity with Belt and Road. Right now it's opening up Africa. We could trade with each other better. Zimbabwe could trade with Uganda. Zimbabwe could trade with Kenya, because there's so much happening there that we could get from each other and we can develop. But what we need to do is sit down and negotiate and really look at what country is best at what, and we all play our best roles. Because when I look at all the other Western countries, everyone has found one specialty, and if we could find that one and say, if we have lithium, we're going to send it. We have a power deficit in Africa. But if we can have all these things coming back and we develop it within our countries, we can trade with each other and then we can develop. But the relationship could be beneficial, but it's how we can negotiate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, as a young person, obviously my question is going to be youth-centric. All right, so the question goes like, how are the Chinese investments going to benefit young people? And if in future, how are they going to? And is there anything for young people in the Chinese investments? And as Dr. Chimanikire said, young people are not at the negotiating table. So who is going to speak the needs or what the youth want?
Recording stopped.
Thank you.
And you want your question answered by?
Dr. Chimanikire.
All right. And we'll take one more question to save time.
My question is around security. What I didn't hear from Dr. Ngube's study or from the panel are any security concerns around the Parliament building. Look, I've been there, full disclosure, I'm an MP, but I certainly was wary of logging into the Wi-Fi. I'm not sure what their interest is in building such a colossal building when the last thing we need when it comes to strengthening our democracy is another building. If we're to strengthen democracy, it's not about having the structure. It's about ensuring that principles of constitutionalism, the rule of law, are respected. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about whether there's been any analysis or investigation into what sort of security protocols we have as Zimbabwe, or we just go in and sit in that building, log into our Wi-Fi, do all that, and we don't know. And cue what happened with the AU building. The Chinese built that, and look at what sort of security risk or threat they created for us. So is that a concern at all? Has anyone looked into it? Is anybody concerned? Thank you.
Well, ideally, everyone must benefit, but it's not like that in our environment. But all I can say is, from the academic point of view, by the way, I'm now at the Midland State University. What we have done, right from the time I was at UZ, we have come up with programs for young people, both old and young people, in international relations. And we've been training them for 1.5 years on the issues that we're discussing here. The same is happening at Midlands University. If you come there, we have a 1.5 year program whereby if you are in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Trade, you will be capacitated. But I must emphasize that, the allocation of delegations is not based on merit or whatever, but you may be lucky to be one of them. Thank you.
As far as I know, there hasn't been a lot of research in that area, but there are risks. Because what happened at the AU in 2018 shows us that there is a possibility of espionage. So it means that your discussions and everything that you do there, they snoop and listen to it probably and relay it back to Beijing. So, and I think as Africans we need to quickly learn this, because the ECOWAS headquarters in West Africa is being built as a donation by the Chinese as well, currently. So, as Dr. Nyemba has said, are we really poor to the extent that we cannot build our own parliaments? That is where the question is. And also, it speaks to the issue, of independence and sovereignty, because those are symbolic institutions. If we cannot build our own parliaments and wait for donations to build those parliaments, then it means there's a problem. So definitely there is a security risk in terms of espionage taking place. Both in terms of all the 15 parliament buildings that have been built by the Chinese across Africa, the AU headquarters as well as the ECOWAS headquarters. I think as Africans we really need to reflect on that. There is a problem there.
Thank you very much. That's quite a surprise, because you didn't warn me that you would ask me to do that. So I will have to do the same disclaimer that the colleague from the United Nations. What I give you is my own impression, my own perception, and not necessarily a standpoint of my government. Evidently, I'm not impartial. I'm coming from a country that depends largely on foreign trade. And the first remark I would make is, you have talked a lot about of all the resources that Zimbabwe has, and you can be proud upon it. But if you look at Germany, and you asked me the question when we started to sit down, what has Germany? We have no minerals. We have brain power. The education is the question. And that is something, I'm only here 1 year now in the country. I came last July, and it was for me the first time in Africa. And what unfortunately very many people told me is that, especially in Zimbabwe, the education system has been going downwards for a couple of years now. And I think that's a great danger, because so far, I was also told, it was the brain power that made Zimbabweans successful abroad. So I think that is one thing you have to keep in mind and put into this whole discussion. So it's not only resources, natural resources. How to make profit from it. I'm very happy that you mentioned inner African trade. I think that is also, I mean, there are negotiations on a free trade, in African free trade zone, etc. This dependency, even if you want to trade nowadays, you very often go through Europe, you go through Australia, etc., going back and forth instead of doing it directly. So, and as I think that African countries have very often similar difficulties, different topics, but similar difficulties, you are much easier on an equal level of trying to get into it. So I really do not understand why this is not enforced much more and happening more often. The relationship to China. The Germans have, in the last couple of years, been very dependent on commerce with or trade with China. We have huge investments there. We have huge Chinese investments in Germany. And there are concerns. The security question. It's not only listening in, it's the buying power. It's the outbuying power and buying out also your ideas. So right now in Germany we have a period started only 2 years ago maybe, where we have become much more prudent about it, or intend to become more prudent, because the dependency in which we have given ourselves is only now we are realizing of how strong we have gotten into that. And 1 year that I've come here, the whole question about debts and arrears has started last December. And as you said, the elephant in the room is China. We don't know exactly. If you look at the sums that are discussed, that there's like 17.5, 18 billion foreign debt, or debt. Part of it is internal debt. If you look at the foreign debt, I think the basic core is 5 or 6 billion. The estimates for China are between $2 to $4 billion. Nobody knows the exact number, and the Chinese are, they've been sitting in the room in these negotiations, never taking a word, listening in, and every time you ask them, so what do you think about it? Oh, that questions are bilateral questions, so we don't talk about it in a multilateral forum. So I'm not impartial. I'm coming from a Western country. We have our interests, and certainly investments done by the United States, by the UK, by Germany, by Belgium are always looking for our or their own advantages. That's the part of trade, and therefore also you're very right. The capacity to negotiate is something that is absolutely crucial in this field. So yeah, I'd be careful. I mean, I can give one example where we actually try to work very concretely, and that's our development executing company, GIZ. They have somebody in the Ministry of Finance, especially trying to help them how to write a budget, to really understand, as you say, because there's a lack of knowledge of what has to get into the budget, how to get to balance the budget, and which everything that has to be incorporated. So I think there are possibilities where you can work together. And the last remark I would make is, even if, but that's a very personal feeling, when you speak about China has a policy of not interfering in the internal affairs, unfortunately my interpretation of that is they are willing to accept the corruption in your country. And I think that is something that, with, at least from a German point of view, our companies have learned that corruption does not help you, does not further business, and the German public has become very sensitive about it. And so I think in dealing with Africa, and the German government has tried to step up these relationships. In a couple of days, our Chancellor is coming for the third time to Africa for travel. And I think there is a little bit more consciousness about these questions on our side than it might be on the Chinese. So I hope that helps.